welcome back to another episode of Exposing Ourselves. I'm Travis Ritchie, and this is episode 20. It's a very special episode. This is the show where we expose each other to new things. Matt, a big music fan, will assign me one of his favorite albums or playlists to listen to each week, and I, a movie buff, will give him one of my favorite films, and we come together on this podcast to discuss it all. And with me, as always, is my good friend...
Matt Runquist. Hey, tonight, Travis, we're going to talk about the movie Swiss Army Man, the music Alice in Chains Unplugged. And because it's a very special episode, neither one of us has ever heard or seen them before.
Exactly. We buck the trend of our format a little bit every 10 episodes and assign each other things that we have not experienced ourselves, but would like to. So, yeah. So before we get into talking about the meat of the episode, how are you?
I'm pretty good. This was a good week. If you remember last week, we had a couple of tests this week medically. And the good news is Amy officially has a diagnosis and there is a treatment for it. It's a surgery, an abdominal surgery, and that is not scheduled yet. And that's kind of a big deal and scary and all that stuff. But at this point, after 8 months of pretty chronic pain every time she eats, a surgery is good.
So it's hope. It is what it is,
yes,
which is nice.
It's hope. Hope's good.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
I'm glad for that.
So other
else?
than that, still rocking and rolling. Although I've mostly written a song this week, but I did not really get anything recorded at all. I may actually have to stand there with my guitar and just live sing into the microphone after our podcast just to get something down. I'm certainly not going to officially release it. I might sort of do this is the demo version of this song, and then I'll work on it, hopefully before the next album is released. So I do have, 13 weeks between albums, and there's certainly downtime in there. We're going on vacation soon, and we're going to be on the road. So I'll be writing stuff on the road, but not recording anything. So I think this will just be leading into that. And my guitar playing is not good enough that I can just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to just wail on the acoustic guitar and everybody's going to be super impressed.
Yeah. You need a little production.
I need a little production magic. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I hear you. This could be interesting to have a on the road kind of theme for some of your album.
Yeah.
I did buy my copy of your first Stank Hole album.
Is that you? So, you bought it digitally?
Yeah, I did buy it digitally. I don't do physical media. So
did you buy it on Bandcamp?
I did buy it on Bandcamp because that is more beneficial to you.
Yeah, that is more beneficial to me. I was super excited that I was I sold a digital album this week and I don't know who it is, but now I know.
Oh, it doesn't tell you who bought it?
No, it told me who bought it, but it doesn't tell me your real name. It just tells me your Bandcamp username, so...
Oh, like the secret email I use so that Bandcamp doesn't send me stuff. I don't want to, because I use the hide my email thing that Apple has where you can set up a different unique email for every website.
Okay. Yeah, it didn't give me an email. It gave me some username, but maybe the username was just the front half of the email or something like that.
Possibly. It's usually some sort of two random words and then a number. Pyloric valve. That's actually a thing. I was because one of my emails does have the word pyloric in it, and that delighted me very much, and so that was what was in my head. That's great. Well, hopefully sales will continue to pick up, and I did have an audition this week that I was really excited about. My very first soap opera audition. Ooh. And what's funny is I'm friends with a casting director who works on a soap opera, personal friends, but he has never brought me in, to my knowledge, to audition. Maybe once 9 years ago, and but never again. And then so this audition was not for that guy, which surprised me. It's for a soap opera that I had not previously auditioned for, and so it was exciting. It's a recurring or possibly recurring. It's a doctor who's a little bit unscrupulous. Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine
And
that.
so yeah, I haven't heard yet, but I watched the audition over again last night, and I was like, you know what, this is a pretty good audition. So
I
we'll
would
see.
love it if you were on a soap opera, and I think that would
So
be
would
a
I.
good fit for you. I mean, obviously, I think
I don't think I'm good looking enough for most soap operas, to be honest.
well, you're
but
not good looking enough for like the super good looking guy,
the handsome
but you're
lead. Yeah,
definitely good looking enough to be on a soap opera for sure.
yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
definitely creepy enough, like, to be the creepy doctor who is unscrupulous in his in his practices.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that, if anything. And the thing I like about soap operas is that they have a very fast turnaround time. Like, you have to learn all your lines really quick, and that's something that being a sketch performer at Acme really helped me prepare for. So we were learning brand new sketch shows every week
Yeah.
for years. So the other thing, on Friday after my improv class, I went downtown to meet with a friend and hang out for a couple hours, and came outside, and my fancy e-bike that is my only mode of transportation was stolen. It was missing from its the bike rack that I had locked it to with my fancy schmancy kryptonite lock and chain, and it was just gone.
Ooh.
There was a tiny piece of the lock remaining, and so I walked down to the police station, the closest police station, to do a report, and I had to go around the side of the building because like the front was closed, so I had to go around to where like the garage is, and the officer who was in the garage he was like, oh well, call this number and or flag, maybe flag down a car if you see one coming, flag down a black and white, and they'll maybe help you. And he said, in the meantime, I'll see if I can find someone too. And the number he gave me, I tried to call it 25 times, and it was busy every single time.
Wow.
And so finally he calls me over and says, hey, I got someone who's going to help you. And so this new officer did the report, and they were all very nice because I'm a white man, and it was probably, I don't want to make assumptions, but I in that moment I did feel,
No, Travis, I'm sure you're a white man.
I am, and I did feel a little bit of relief at my privilege. So I will say that, but I recognized my privilege at the very least, and so we were doing the report, and then while we were doing that, a couple other female officers came up in their squad car, and they were like, "Okay, we'll ride around. And I had an AirTag. I have an AirTag on the bike."
Okay.
And it was showing me where the bike was, and I said, "Here's where it says the bike is," and they're like, "Oh, okay, we'll go look for it, and if it changes locations, just let us know." And I was like, "Well, what if I just ride with you, and I can tell you in real time where it says it is, and then also if we get close, it'll do different things, like it'll lead us even closer." And they're like, "No, don't do that." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so I just stayed with the guy who was doing my report, and he finished the report. We updated the location once to the squad car, and they didn't find it. And here it was at this time, probably 10 o'clock at night, downtown LA, and the AirTag was saying it was in a pretty gnarly neighborhood. And so the officer was like, "Don't walk down there." And I'm like, okay. So that's where it is. I've been keeping track of it. It hasn't changed locations in quite a while. I have a call in with I have a renter's insurance, so I'm just trying to make sure if it's covered. They said it was when I originally tried to add coverage for it, because it's an expensive bike. It's an e-bike. It was like, $2,000. But they said when I originally tried that I didn't need to add coverage because it was covered for theft, which is really my only worry.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that's still true. And,
Now,
maybe there'll be,
had you registered your kryptonite lock as well?
No, I don't think I had.
Yeah. That's
which is really too bad.
Well, it's very frustrating, right? Because kryptonite is like, oh yeah, we'll insure your bike.
Yeah.
But of course, there's a huge rigmarole that you have to go through beforehand, in order to like properly register that you blah blah blah, and so
exactly, yeah. So it's a pain. It's a hassle. I'm a little pissed, to be honest,
Yeah.
but trying to be happy. And I want to be happy for you and for you, audience, to as we talk about some interesting things. Because, oof, do I have opinions about both of the things we exposed ourselves to this week?
That's very exciting. I do as well. So what do you say we get started? Change things up a little?
Shake it up,
Shake it up.
and do the
Movie
first.
Yeah, movie
All right.
first. Yeah,
All right.
let's do it.
Okay. Well, the movie, I will tell us about the movie. It's a movie. So you may remember how much we loved Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was this year's big Oscar winner, won Best Picture, Best Director, a couple of Best Actor awards, and it was just a phenomenal movie. The directors, the Daniels, previously directed a movie called Swiss Army Man, starring Paul Dano and Daniel Radcliffe as a corpse that Paul Dano finds on a desert island that he is trapped on, and he and the corpse. Now, if you watch the trailer, I always assumed that kind of the whole thing takes place on this desert island, and that the end of it is them trying to get off the island because he realizes that the corpse's flatulence is strong enough to actually propel it through the water like a jet ski. But that happens in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and so they get off the island and make it back to the mainland right away. And then it's basically this movie is so weird, guys.
It's pretty weird.
It is delightfully weird, first of all, and I really, it's funny because the sound of the farting is not funny farts. Do you know? There's a funny fart, and then there's kind of gross wet farts, and this was more the kind of gross wet farts that I was like, in my, I love a funny fart as much as the next guy, but and I actually had a conversation this week with my ex-boyfriend who was trying to come up with a title for his show, and one of them had a fart in the name, and then the other had something else, and the name with farts was Farts Aren't Funny Anymore, and other things I've learned in my 30s, and I was like, that is a great title if you don't say they aren't funny. Because he said he had a poll, and a 20-1 poll picked the other title. And I said, yeah, but if you change it to something other than farts aren't funny, I bet everyone will choose that, because the fact is everybody thinks farts are funny.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but these kind of farts in this movie were not that. And I was at first thinking, oh man, this is going to be this kind of movie, gross. This is going to be like a gross farts kind of movie. And it kind of was, but it also wasn't. It transcended that to such a kind of an amazing way. So spoilers if you haven't seen it, but I will tell you now that you should see it. It's seeable, and it becomes a story about the reason Paul Dano was out in the desert island and about to kill himself, because he felt he kind of ran away from home because he thought no one loved him, and the corpse actually helps him figure out stuff. And it's interesting. I will say that the thing that mars this movie, the only thing that mars this movie for me, is the ending. And we can talk about that. But first, I guess, tell me what you thought of it. I maybe, should I say what I thought first? Because usually we say why we love the movie.
Yeah. I mean,
I guess whatever, I did really like the movie.
Yeah, I feel like you've communicated a fair amount of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So your turn then.
Yeah. No, I did dig the movie. It's funny because it has a very Everything Everywhere All at Once sensibility. You can tell very, right at the beginning, they have a very unique visual style, extremely heavy on slow motion, and operatic music to go with your slow motion. And extremely heavy on weirdness, but humorous weirdness. And this is good stuff, right? A lot of it is really, really enjoyable. The beginning where he turns into a jet ski through the power of farts is extremely funny. It's because you're right, there is a line that you're trying not to cross where it's funny or it's gross, or it's funny or it's gross, and this is absolutely both, right? There's no way that you can say that this lands firmly on one side or the other, but
Yeah.
it is very, very charming and funny. I agree with you that the ending does kind of, it has a way of making you go, what did we do all this for? And we can talk about the ending, but I there was a lot of really good stuff in this movie where at first it seems like they're traveling through the forest, but as time goes by you realize they're kind of just hanging out in the forest, and in this one area not far from like a bridge over a ravine, and they're, basically kind of living this sort of fantasy life. And I liked all of that, right? Yes. Do you have you're making a face.
I'm making a face that says, did you know any of that before the very end of the movie? Because I thought throughout them until the end that they were traveling through the forest.
No, I did not. Right through the whole thing, it seems like they're traveling, and then, I mean, so there's definitely stuff where, because they start living out this fantasy where there's sort of elaborate contraptions that Paul Dano builds to
operate the body.
Yeah, to operate the body and to sort of help the body experience. So the body is named Manny, and to sort of help Manny experience these things that are supposedly from his memory, but we later find out are actually from Paul Dano's memory.
Right.
And I got to admit, like, I loved the first half of this movie. Absolutely loved it. I was all in. And, but it did start to wear on me a little bit. So I would say the difference between Everything Everywhere All at Once and this is that Everything Everywhere All at Once sort of builds to a crescendo, and everything kind of serves that story that is happening. This felt a little bit like we have all these visual flourishes and sort of weird jokes and things that we like to do that maybe didn't have, like, I think they were kind of searching for a point, like a reason to tell this story, and maybe didn't quite find it. And a great attempt, but like just not quite there. Yeah, you go. I don't want to.
No, I thought that there was a point, and watching it, I thought that there was a very specific point about loneliness and like a seizing the day type of story. And it's just that then the ending came along and kind of, it was like, oh, no, not that. And so it felt like they fumbled the ending a little bit, even though it felt like it was crescendoing very well, and that they had a point, like things were building on things that you would see early on, and you have that kind of play in later, and the abilities that the body has kind of naturally. Not only are they is it a progression, but also like some of them you only learn through montage. But it feels completely acceptable that you learn about this ability, like to chop wood through montage. And then when he tries to use that to defend himself against a bear later on and doesn't work, it feels like, he doesn't say what he's trying to do, but you're like, oh, he's trying to do that thing that we saw in a montage. But it's not working. It's interesting. The building of contraptions to power to move the body felt very much like Weekend at Bernie's, but like if directed by, I don't know, Spike Jonze or
that's really on point, because Spike Jonze is exactly who popped into my head when you said that.
Right, because he's got that very like whimsical orchestral kind of feel to it. And even the music I found fascinating, where sometimes the characters would sing along to music after the music started, and then other times the music would take its cue from the characters and join in later. And there's one of the things I did over the pandemic was finally read Frankenstein.
Okay.
And this is kind of a Frankenstein story of a kind,
Sure.
of the reanimating tissue, and then the monster becoming very intelligent emotionally, and much more like when you read Frankenstein the book, it's not at all like what you think the Frankenstein story. At least for me, it was completely
Yeah.
surprising, and the monster ends up being very, very smart.
Mm-hmm.
And so here too, the body, I thought it was going to be mostly watching him struggle to communicate, but fairly early on, Daniel Radcliffe as the body, as Manny, becomes fairly communicative, and then
Yeah.
it's mostly about him figuring out how to be a human, how to be human through
Yeah.
his emotions and his physical activity and stuff like that. So I thought that was funny. And incidentally, Jurassic Park, which plays a role
Mm-hmm.
in their relationship, Manny and the other human, I don't remember what his name is, Hank.
The alive one.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Jurassic Park is also a Frankenstein story. So I thought that was
Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting for sure. Yeah, it's funny. I'm struggling a little bit to feel out why I struggled towards the end of this movie. I looked up some stuff afterwards because I was curious. There's never really a good explanation of how he ends up on a desert island, right? We know that he's emotionally distraught and feels very alone, and he's separated from his family, and he doesn't talk to people. But for something that is sort of a kind of a critical plot point, I mean, people don't just end up on desert islands
do
for
you
no
think that the
reason.
desert island is not a real island, that it was a metaphorical island
I mean,
in his mind?
maybe, right? But then that sort of throws away the whole jet ski thing, right? like,
Well, and again, like if that last scene where the body takes off as a jet ski out into the ocean, and all the regular people also see it,
yeah,
that means that it actually was a jet ski,
yeah.
and it suddenly makes everything else like feel like it doesn't make sense to me. Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the thing though. I don't know that it does necessarily make sense even without that, right? Like, yeah, there's this part of you that wants to go, okay, yeah, this whole thing is happening sort of inside Paul Dano's head, and this is all,
yeah,
Weekend at Bernie's, right? But why, right? Like, why do
well,
that to a corpse?
because he's
Why?
crazy. I mean, he's a little insane, but he's also working through, I mean, but he's also working through this life trauma that he has of getting to the point where he was so done with life that he felt he should end it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
a
and
traumatic thing.
So here's something that I thought was interesting was they make it clear in the movie when the cops are talking about Manny, they talk about how his wounds are clearly self-inflicted suicide wounds, right? And I thought,
Right.
I thought that was interesting, right? Because obviously Paul Dano is starting or trying to commit suicide right when he meets Manny. And I,
Right.
so there's this, like, was he on the borderline between life and death? Is this all a hallucination before before the lights go out? And then, of course, you're right. I mean, he hits the real world, and all of a sudden, the real world is magical, and there is this sense that they made some decisions because there were things that they wanted to do, and not because they necessarily made sense for the story.
Like what? Like what do you mean?
Well, like, the the fact that, like, he jet skis away at the end, right? And that
Oh.
because it seems to imply that there really was a magical corpse, right?
Right. Yes.
Right. I mean,
Yes.
I guess maybe here's the thing that I will say, right? Without the ending of Manny jet skiing away as a magical corpse, the whole thing makes a little more sense, right? Because then it's Paul Dano in the wilderness with a body, living out a fantasy about interaction with other humans and becoming less lonely through, like, growth, right?
Right. Yep.
But that story doesn't actually make sense, right? I mean, bodies start to smell and they get rigor mortis, and like there, and you can't just be within 200 yards of somebody's house and never see them. And like, there's all this stuff where they like go down the hillside and all that stuff is right there. Like the whole time, apparently, Paul Dano and Manny are just outside Mary Elizabeth Winstead's
within
house.
short walking distance.
Yeah, within short walking distance of her house. And that's creepy and weird and
a little creepy and weird. Yeah.
So,
but if they're in the same town, then it doesn't give me, I don't know, they know each other and he's close to home. So that's, I guess, what I was thinking there. But if the whole thing is him trying to figure out how to kind of seize the moment to talk to Sarah, if he feels so powerfully about her, which is weird now because also she's married and has a daughter.
Yeah.
And so she's not just a single girl that's possibly there. So this movie has a lot of things to say that it actually doesn't say about mental anguish and sort of other emotional issues, very kind of strong emotional and mental issues that people have. And it never actually talks about those kind of things. It kind of plays itself as a fairy tale, but it has, if you delve in just a little deeper, it has things that it kind of needs to address that it doesn't.
Okay, so here's one bit of delving in that I'd like to do, and then maybe we can get off of this. But there's the whole sequence where they fall in love. Paul Dano and Manny fall in love. Paul Dano dressed as Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Sarah, thank you. And it's not at all clear to me what's happening there in a practical sense or in a fantastical sense. Does Paul Dano love Manny? Does Manny love Paul Dano? Is he giving up on Mary Elizabeth Winstead because he's in love with the corpse now? Why is he happy that the corpse gets? I'm not sure.
In what point are you saying that they fall in love?
The underwater sequence where then they kiss and there's big smiles and there's.
Oh, I think the smile is more realizing.
I think there's even a part where he says like, you taught me how to love, or there's stuff sort of explicitly like, you taught me that there's like people worth loving, and it's.
I mean, I think that they're like best friends and they have that kind of love, but I think the smile under the water is more in realization that Manny has the ability to generate air. And it's more like I thought I was dead. I thought we were both dead. And now I realize that we're both going to be okay because you can give me air. And it's more of a realization of that the moment is not hopeless than a realization of love. And there's a moment earlier on when he is dressed as Sarah and Manny is really falling in love with Sarah, but it's Paul Dano dressed up as Sarah. Yeah. And then they almost kiss, but they're both drunk. Especially Paul Dano is actually drunk and Manny is the reflection of Paul Dano's emotions. So they almost kiss but don't. And I think that can be attributed to the drunkenness rather than actual emotional love.
Okay. Well, I mean, I feel like that's kind of skirting the issue, but I also then that goes back to, well, if this is all in Paul Dano's head, then he's kissing a weeks old corpse multiple times. There's a lot that's skating by, right? Like, either it's supernatural corpse for real, in which case the stuff that we see the supernatural corpse doing with the saving him from a bear and saving him from a desert island and giving him air when he's underwater and giving him water to drink and all these things, that's real, right? Or it's not real, right? And if it's not real, then how does he survive these situations, right? So I I feel like the movie wants to have it whichever way it wants it in the moment, and
Yes,
that's where it struggles for me. But
I
in
agree.
terms of like feel, I love the feel of the movie. I love the humor of the movie. I love the
Hmm.
acting in the movie. Like there's very little else to criticize, but I do feel like there's a big structural problem with this movie.
Yep, I agree 100%, and I also agree that I love the performances, especially Daniel Radcliffe, which
Yeah.
could have been could have been problematic somehow, but like it's actually just beautiful acting,
Yeah.
and the music I love, and the editing, how the editing is fast paced when their emotions are high, but also it slows down and becomes very deliberate when the characters are slow and contemplative, and so there is just so much about it that I really love, and the production design of
Yeah.
this home that they build for themselves, and these contraptions that Paul Dano's
Yeah.
character is supposedly making for them are all wonderful. It's wonderful, fantastical almost, and it's almost shot like a fairy tale with a little bit extra bloom on the lighting,
Yeah.
and it's great, but yeah, I agree with you. That structure problem is it what it does for me is it makes this a movie that I probably won't watch again unless I want someone else to watch it. Unless I'm
Yeah.
watching it with somebody else, I
Yeah.
might watch it again. But as it is, I was happy to watch it the one time. As Kevin Ivachik says, I feel better for having seen it,
Yeah.
but probably won't watch it again. I think I had a rating in mind, and I think I'm going to settle on it. I think I'm going to give this a 7.
I am also going to give it a 7. I think that's right where it belongs. It's a really good movie that has some
Hmm.
significant flaws, and that's,
Yeah,
that's where it's at.
yeah,
I want to
and
give
definitely worth watching.
you definitely reminded me of one thing that I want to give them kudos for, and this is true of all of Everything Everywhere All at Once. They also directed the video for Turn Down for What. If you've never seen that,
Yeah,
it's
I
fantastic,
have.
and yes, and you're like, oh yeah, this is the Daniels. But the compliment that I wanted to give them before we move on to the next thing is they use a full color palette throughout the movie. It's not
Yeah.
like that thing that I hated so much about The Power of the Dog, where it was like like a dirt filter for the entire movie. They
Hmm.
don't do that. They use all the colors of the rainbow throughout the film. Certainly there are scenes that have, that are color corrected, but throughout the film you get to see all the colors of the rainbow, and I love that. So,
Nice, nice, excellent. So sevens from both of us. That's awesome. So
yeah.
yeah, I think both of us would agree. See it. It's
Yeah.
worth seeing,
It's
especially
absolute
if you liked, Everything
Yeah,
Everywhere
it's
All at Once.
absolutely worth seeing. It's almost like there's like this great sophomore album that's like a breakthrough to the popular culture, and then you find out, oh, they had a debut album a few years ago, and that's also good,
Hmm.
and you can see the seeds, or you can hear the seeds
Yep.
of what later became super popular, but it's not as good. I see that all the
Yeah.
time with sophomore albums. So,
Yeah.
all right,
Absolutely. And
so
one note too, I ended up watching it with subtitles on, and I usually don't do that, but I think it was hard for me to I wanted to see what the body was saying in those initial scenes,
yeah,
and then I just left it on. And the dialogue and music is actually really interesting
yeah,
with subtitles.
yeah,
And there is actually a piece of music that starts with "Everything Everywhere
yeah,
is everything" or something like
yeah,
that. I can't
yeah.
remember what the words were, but I was like, "Oh, that's cool."
Yeah, yeah, it was
So
a nice little pre-back. I don't know.
yeah,
Anyways,
exactly.
all right. So the music. So this week
Uh-huh.
we listened to Alice in Chains Unplugged. Alice in Chains Unplugged is an unplugged album and a mostly acoustic album, live concert, recorded by '90s grunge band Alice in Chains. And Alice in Chains was a band that you've probably vaguely heard of before. They were sort of like the next tier below like the top tier bands, although I think a lot of people would get mad at me for saying that, but they were just a little bit heavier than a lot of the bands that became popular in grunge, and they were one of the things they were really known for was their slow tempos. And I gotta say, listening to this album, it got on me a little bit. I did really enjoy it. I've heard many good things about this album. I had never heard it before. I listened to it this week, and I enjoyed large portions of it, but there are times when I was like, pick it up a little, boys. Come on. We don't have everything doesn't have to be the slowest tempo. Anyways, but no, I chose it because I know it's a definitely a landmark album. It was recorded, I think, less than 6 months before the death of Lane Staley from a heroin overdose. It was their first live show in like 2 years. He had been struggling with substance abuse issues, the things that later claimed his life. The band has continued on after his death. They hired a new singer. The guitarist, Jerry Cantrell, is a very highly regarded guitarist, and they've released a few albums and are still a going concern. But Lane Staley is no longer with any of us. So what'd you think of the album, Travis?
So I will say that I fully expected this to be much more your thing than mine once I started listening to it. I was thinking that you did. It's funny that they start the album talking about how they it's been a few years. It's been like 3 years. And I was like, wait, is this a new album? And they didn't record because of the pandemic? Like, it sounds exactly like they were away for the pandemic, and now they're back in their first live show. And so it's real, but it was actually recorded back in the 90s. So I did not like this album, to be honest. I did not listen to it a second time. Mm-hmm. I kind of struggled through it the first time, and there were a couple of things that, like, it goes against a lot of my rules that I've established in this process of this show, and you couldn't understand the lyrics. It was very mumble singy, almost. There's a word, mumblecore, that came along.
Rooster.
Reminded me exactly, like, oh, I heard rooster. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was lines like where you understand a word or something every once in a while. It reminded me of kind of like one of the things Nirvana got parodied for, is that kind of singing. And so I also, now the music wasn't bad, but I felt that every element of this band was okay. And like every element of it could have been done by just about any halfway skilled singer or drummer or guitarist or whatever. Nothing was particularly special. And it's funny because a couple of moments I was really excited. Like at one point they start playing a piece of music and I'm like, oh, I know that piece of music. And then they're like, just kidding. That's this other artist that we're just playing their guitar list. I'm like,
so just to jump in there, that is Enter Sandman by Metallica, and Metallica was very famously in the audience for this show. So they were doing a little reference to them.
Okay. So yes, I recognized Enter Sandman, I guess. And then they stopped. And the other thing that I really liked was at the end, after, like, if you're listening to this playlist that Matt posted, the second to last song, which is called Over Now, ends with them basically being like, all right, that's it, you guys. And they get, you can hear the audience going, one more, stuff like that. And they come back out and do this thing like, all right, well, here's one more, just something we were messing around with at the sound check. And they do this little like guitar work and song thing. And I'm like, oh, this is delightful. And then they're like, no, that's not what we're doing. Instead, here's a song called The Killer Is Me, which is awful. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, what are you doing to me? And I'm sorry, Matt. I was struck by how much I didn't like this album. It surprised me because I want to be open-minded in this experience, and I have genuinely appreciated you assigning me everything else we've listened to up to this point. The only thing, and I was like, I didn't like this album so much that I figured out a theory that Alice in Chains' success is due exclusively to their amazing name. Because Alice in Chains is indisputably a great name for a band, and I think that I hypothesized that their success was due entirely to that name. I'm probably wrong. I allow for that possibility or probability even, but I thought that was at least it made sense to me as a theory given this album.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think those are all fair reads. When my friends were recommending this album to me, it was because I had said that Eric Clapton's Unplugged and Nirvana's Unplugged were the two Unplugged albums that stand above the rest. And people were like, oh no, Alice in Chains, you got to listen to that one. And so, I was like, okay, well, this is supposedly a classic, right? But one of the things that I love about those other Unplugged concerts, and I know you're not super familiar with them, but I'll just give a little bit about them, is that they go into their own catalog and play those songs, but they do it in a way that sort of explores them musically and gives you different sonic palettes throughout the album. They both have guests that come on that sort of change things up a little bit at various points in the performance. Nirvana did, I think, almost a half dozen songs that they didn't write. They did a Lead Belly song. They did 3 Meat Puppet songs. They did a David Bowie song. And I think there's one other cover on their Unplugged concert. They, almost being like, hey, these are all the things that influenced us, or Kurt Cobain as a songwriter, and Alice in Chains doesn't do any of that, right? Like the closest they get is like a few seconds of like stage banter where they're kind of giving Metallica a little bit of a hard time about their haircuts, right? Like it's, this is a very samey album, and I don't think so. That I've heard, their plugged in music, and I like it. I don't love it, right? But it very much suffers from the translation to acoustic instruments. You sort of I would say not.
Are they actually playing acoustic guitar?
I think there might be. Well, they're plugged in acoustic electrics is what they're typically playing. Yeah, but like the bass is acoustic bass and so forth. And and I don't want to say lack of musicianship, but like especially because I lean so hard on repetition in my writing, right? Like these are like sort of repetitive figures repeated for long times at pretty glacial paces most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And so it just sort of exposes like, hey, there's not like a whole lot of movement or anything in this. And then the sonic palette is very limited, right? It's one or two acoustic guitars, an acoustic bass.
Kind of boring.
Yeah, and drumming that is extremely metronomic. Like there's not like if there was a metronome back there, you would not notice. You wouldn't be like, oh man, it's too bad that drummer had so many great fills or whatever. Like he's just back there keeping time.
And I'm not a music aficionado, but like I do know that there are Travis Barkers out there that are like killing it on drums, and this guy was just not. I had two thoughts about this album. One of them is I think I just in general don't like concert albums. And I think let's just avoid those in the future unless it's something spectacular. I'm kind of curious about your Nirvana Unplugged or your Eric Clapton Unplugged. I have not listened to either of those except for maybe one or two of Eric Clapton's songs. But generally speaking, I think that the concert experience hurts my ability to hear lyrics and stuff like that, And so the other thing that the phrase that popped into my mind while listening to this was a quote from The Simpsons from back in the '90s, where Bart Simpson says, "Making teenagers depressed is like shooting fish in a barrel," and this seemed like a "let's make teenagers depressed" type of album, probably type of band, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
feel
I
like that was
mean,
probably their usefulness.
I think that's maybe a little harsh, but not exactly wrong, right?
Well, I mean, and back in the '90s, I do remember those days where emo culture was very big,
Mhm.
and so this was a time when I don't know, teenagers loved to be depressed rather than be the pop music
Yeah,
consumers that they are now.
this is like before the rise of Britney Spears or anything like that. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I do think of Britney Spears as kind of like the cultural like turning point from so Nirvana was like the rise of Nirvana was the turning point from like 80s hair metal and sort of the things that we consider like plasticky rock
Hmm.
music, like sort of disingenuous Hollywood produced, leather pants rock stars, right? And like
Okay.
Nirvana came along and sort of like burned that to the ground, right? And then it was like everything was like grunge bands and alternative bands for the next 7 or 8 years, and then I feel like Britney Spears was like the next turning point where it was like, and obviously pop music had been chugging along that whole time. Pop music will always be with us, right? But that was like she was like the artist that broke so in such a huge way that, and coming from the Disney machine and showing that somebody could make that transition into being a more adult artist, I
Yeah.
think really really kind of changed the game, and like people were ready to sort of not be sad anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
well, we're getting very off topic here. What do you give the album, Travis?
Probably my lowest score yet. I'm gonna give it a 2,
Oh,
and that is only because of the excellent name of the band. That is to me the only redeeming factor of this
yeah.
album.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Um, what would I give this? I think. I mean, I do like the songs that I like, the sort of songs that I knew. I liked those; they stood out to me. But there was like a whole mess of songs that all sounded pretty much the same to me. I'm struggling between a 4 and a 5. I'm gonna say this is a 5 for me. It's like right smack dab in the middle. Like, no, you know what? A 5 feels wrong. It's a
It feels
4.
generous.
Yeah, it feels
Okay.
generous. It's a 4. Because
Okay,
it's
there we
funny.
go.
I said it. You know what, though, Travis? I did that thing where, like, sometimes when you have to make a decision, you make a decision and then you see how you feel about it.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, as soon as I said 5, I was like, no, it's not. It's not a 5. I wanted it to be a 5, but no, this is a
I
4.
agree
This
with
is
you.
a
I
4
think
for
if
me.
knowing what I know of you, I agree with your rating of a 4
Yeah. So.
for you.
All right. So,
All
let's
right.
see. So there we are. Sevens on the movie and a 4 and a 2 on the music. So maybe not such a classic album for us.
I guess not. I guess not. But that's
All
all
right.
right. That's all right.
All
This
right.
is you know what? That's part of what this whole process is about and why I enjoy doing this show. Like my bike fiasco, my mom raised me to look at the world through the perspective of great adventure. And she said,
Hmm.
no matter what happens to you in life, good or bad, it's just another of life's great adventures.
Yeah.
And so that was how I viewed my bike getting stolen, and this is how I view listening to this album.
Oh man. Well, if you get a new e-bike, you'll have to name it Alice. Uh,
Oh, there we go. Alice in Chains could be.
Alice. Yeah.
It's
Well,
got a
only
chain.
when the lock is on. But yeah.
Well, there's a chain on the bike. It's a
Yeah.
bike
That's
chain.
true. Yeah.
All right. Well, what do you got for me this coming week? For I know
Well,
what you've got for me.
yeah, you do know what you've got for me. So this week I have disappointment because there are now 3 Sundays in a row that I will not be able to tape. We'll talk about it offline, but we'll probably tape an episode shortly after I get back. And you can maybe give me a movie to watch either sometime this week or shortly after I get back. And I will watch it for that episode. But anyways, The thing that I have for you is the debut album by a Milwaukee artist, Panko Stankhole, which is,
what a weird name.
it's a very weird name. It's a terrible name for a band. Solo artist from Milwaukee who's writing and producing one song a week, although that's soon to be in the trash can. But for now, these are the first 13 songs that he recorded this year. Many of them are remixed for the album because he learned how to mix over the course. This is all me. It's all me, Travis. It's not really. It's not anyone else.
I'm aware. I was ready to play along and yes and this whole bit, but
yeah. No, I couldn't do it anymore. I can't. All right, speak about myself.
Drop the pretense.
Yeah, drop the pretense. So, anyways, you're gonna listen to Outhouse, which is the first album from Panko Stankhole. It's available on all the major streaming services. Search for Panko Stankhole. Get those streaming numbers up above the single digits, everybody.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear this. I've never listened to your original music before, I don't think. So God. I'm interested. I wish I had an original movie that I could assign you that I have recently made, but I do not. So
the one listening note that I do want to give you is that there is a fair amount of genre hopping here. There are many different types of songs on here.
Oh, interesting.
So especially early on, I didn't really know what I wanted to be making, and so I gave myself a bunch of prompts. And so there's some pretty wildly different things. It's sort of settled into like an indie rock alternative groove, but there's a bunch of different stuff on there.
Okay. Well, I guess in that vein, I'm going to give you the movie Joker, which came out in 2019 to much acclaim. It was a movie that I did not want to see when it came out because the trailer was awful. It made it look dumb and I don't know what, but it wasn't until everybody was seeing it and it was on the way to making $1 billion. This little kind of like indie take on Joker as a character from Batman, and but it stars Joaquin Phoenix, who I also am not generally a fan of, but I walked out of that movie blown away, and I will. I think that's all I'll say, and yeah, that's all I want to say. I walked into it completely blank, and I kind of want to give you that experience as well. So for you to experience and let me know what you think. So the movie Joker.
Unfortunately, I have seen the memes, so I'm very familiar with about 7 different. This movie was a bit of a meme factory, sort of like Inception.
Maybe, yeah.
And so I have seen a bunch of memes from this film.
Okay, well, hopefully they won't ruin plot points or story or character or anything like that.
I don't think so.
So we'll see what you think about that, and then hey, viewers, let us know what you think about this. We want to hear what you think about the show. If you agreed or disagreed with our opinions, let us know. You can email us at exposingourselvespodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at Exposing Ourselves and leave a post, comment, or send us a message, comment on one of our other posts. Many different ways to let us know your opinion, and we want to hear them. Also, if you would, we are a burgeoning podcast, just coming up through the mire and muck of all the other podcasts that are out there. And one way for us to get a little bit of notice is for you to rate us on whatever you're listening to this podcast on. If it's Apple Podcast, if it's other things. How else do people get this podcast?
There's Deezer, there's YouTube, there's Spotify, there's I don't think Pandora has YouTube? Podcasts. We're absolutely on like YouTube Music or whatever. All right. Yeah, Google Podcasts.
Wherever you're listening to us, please
Google
rate us and leave a review,
yeah.
And it would definitely help us. And it would help us to a greater degree than most other podcasts because we are smaller. So your opinion actually counts for more. It's like living in Montana and voting for the president. Your opinion counts more than someone living in a larger state.
Okay, so I looked up the statistics, and there are 1 billion podcasts, but 999 million of them don't have any ratings at all. So if you, listener, leave us one single rating, we will be better.
Gets us into the top 1%?
Yes, absolutely.
That's insane.
This is true. It's not a made-up fact at all.
Wow. Well, so do us a solid and leave us a review. All right. Well, thanks very much. Hey, Matt.
Yes.
One last thing.
What's that?
Thank you for exposing yourself to me.
Well, Travis, thank you for exposing yourself to me.
It's my pleasure as always. I'll see you. Well, not next week, but we're gonna take a little bit off, and I'll see you when I see you.
I'll see you soon.
All right. Bye.